What's going on, family? This is Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. We're going to continue our conversation on the African-American fighter. Now, it's very important that we have these conversations with you because the African-American fighter's contributions are not recognized. It's not appreciated. And it's my duty to make sure that their contributions are remembered and acknowledged. Because a lot of what's going on today is a result of the African-American fighter's contributions, such as the shoulder roll and shadow boxing and a jab, the 1-2 combination, all came from African-Americans' contributions. Many more styles that we'll go over during the course of this conversation. Now, a lot of the products that you use today, whether you know it or not, are contributions of inventions of African-American fighters. They made tremendous contributions not only in, but out of the ring as well. A lot of them became congressmen in their communities. Their tremendous contribution cannot be overlooked. Now, all year long, I talk about the African-American fighters' experiences. But right now, we're in the middle of Black History Month. And it would be injustice if I did not bring up a lot of the contributions that these great fighters have made. During the course of these videos, I'm going to be discussing George Dixon and Joe Gans, Joe Walcott and Peter Jackson, Frank Craig, the Harlem Coffee Cooler, and young Peter Jackson, Tom Molyneux and Bill Richmond and Dixie Kid, Tiger Flowers, young Pluto, Bobby Dobbs, Larry Temple, George Godfrey, Black Bill, Joe Butler, Black Bill Thompson, and Harry Sutton, George Cole, Bob Armstrong and Sam McVeigh, Sam Langford, Joe Jeanette, and Harry Wills and Harry Martin, Harry Woodson and Bob Tarver, Joe Butler, Kentucky Rosebud, George Gunther, Massa Kendrick, Melva Thompson, Klondike, the Harry Looms, Denver Ed Martin, George Taylor, many, many more fighters, Jack Blackburn and Ruff Turner, Panama Al Gans. I mean, amazing fighters like Kid Chocolate, the Boston Tar Baby is who they call Sam Langford. I know him as the Boston Bone Crusher. You had Hank Griffin and Jack Johnson, who created one of the most defensive styles in boxing history. So let's take a look at some of these great fighters throughout the next couple of videos, right here with me on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, Scrapbook Boxing. Now we're going to talk about Bill Richmond. And Bill Richmond was the first African-American fighter that would come from the United States. The second would be Tom Molyneux. And it's ironic because we're going to be discussing these fighters today. But Bill Richmond was born on August 5th, 1763, Richmond, Staten Island, New York. He weighed 175 pounds. He stood 5'9". And General Earl Percy was one of the commanders of British forces then occupying New York. He took Bill Richmond to England in 1777. The African-American fighter was a scholar, very intelligent young man. His first professional fight was in 1804 as a welterweight. Bill Richmond was a well-dressed black British boxer who would become a fighter well into his 40s. He would become known as the first black American sports star. And Richard would work in a plantation owned by his owner, Richard Shelton. Now, this took place in Staten Island, New York, where he was born. What's amazing about Bill Richmond, he's only 13 years old when he was brought over to England. Now, Richard Shelton was a sharecropper's owner. And Bill Richmond has showed many demonstrations of his intelligence, and he was quite capable of learning how to read. He would solve problems without anyone else knowing about it for Richard Shelton. And Richard Shelton came up with a scheme. He had already made several trips to England because he wanted to buy out businesses and have people work for him. But he couldn't figure out the blueprint, couldn't figure out just how to make that happen. So Bill Richmond, who who was always known for bailing out Richard Shelton, came up with a blueprint. He figured out that if they went over to England and he was brought with him, he can help solve the problems. In this way, the United States can take over England. Now, Bill Richmond was only 13 years old, and Richard Shelton also convinced Perry to allow Richmond to come back to England with him. And Richmond, while he had continued his education, and he was promised an apprenticeship of making cabinets, he was told that he would take care of the young man and he would be fine. See, at the age of 13, Bill Richmond figured that if he went over to England and helped out Richard Shelton with his dreams, he can ask for his freedom papers and he can build a business himself for him and his family as he got older. You see, that's how intelligent Bill Richmond was. Well, when he went over to England, he would eventually find a young woman by the name of Mary Dunwick, and they would be married and have 4 beautiful children. But during the course of time, in defense of his marriage, because Mary Dunwick was a white woman, he would have street fights quite often, to the point where he took up boxing. And one of the men that would show him the trick of the trades was an old-time fighter by the name of Jack Slack. Jack Slack took a liking to Bill Richmond, and Bill Richmond had decided that he wanted to fight one of the number 1 fighters in England, and that was Tom Cribb, because Tom Cribb was making the money and making the noise in England. So they were to tear and prepare for that fight. In 1804, January 23rd, Bill Richmond would face a fighter by the name of George Maddox, fought him in Wilmington, and he was KO'd in the 3rd round in his first professional fight, as was Henry Armstrong in the 3rd round in his first professional fight. 1805, May 21st, he would defeat a fighter by the name of Yusuf, defeated him in 6 rounds, and at that point, he felt he had something going. So he would continue on July 8th, 1805, by defeating Jack Holmes, 26 rounds by knockout. Now that was something that he can actually share with his family, because he earned $100 in that fight. October 8th, he would defeat Tom Cribb. But Tom Cribb would be given the victory. The fight lasted an hour and 30 minutes. The inexperience of Bill Richmond failed to take advantage of opportunities. He would gas out, but he was still hanging there. But many felt that Bill Richmond did enough to at least get the victory. But Tom Cribb would win. And that's unfortunate. In 1809, April 14th, he would defeat Jack Carter, 25 minutes. He would beat Jim Arkinson in 20 minutes. July 11th, he would defeat Ike Woods in 23 rounds. August 9th, he would win from George Maddox, 52 minutes, in a terrific battle. Maddox was 54 years of age at this time. Now, another fighter that's played a very important role in Bill Richmond's life, a fighter by the name of Tom Molyneux. He was born in Georgetown, South Carolina, weighed 198 pounds, and stood 5 foot 8.5 inches. Now, Tom Molyneux had a dad by the name of Zachary, very powerful man. And he had 3 brothers. One was Franklin, and Ithabar, Moses, and Elijah. They were hard, muscular-bound men, and they would outclass all the rivals in Virginia. Now, Tom was born in Richmond, Virginia, March 23rd, 1784. He would always pick up things much heavier than he was at the age of 3 and 4. And this helped him to develop a broad back, shoulders, very powerful legs. He had a 19-inch neck, very short and powerful. And many of them, to compare him to a fighter, would be like the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. Now, Tom's dad unfortunately died at the age of 14, when Tom was 14. And he became a chief master handyman at the sharecropper's estate. This happened years later. And Tom's neighbor, Rudolph Penton, through a party that he was involved in, made an announcement that he heard that all the slaves would be given their freedom papers. And that would happen for Tom Molyneux. He would go up to New York and Harlem, in and out of the saloons, having street fights, because that's the kind of person he was. He was a no-nonsense, took no tolerance from anyone, never smiled, and was ready to rumble and brawl at any given time. Now, during those days, they would pick a man up and body slam him, eye gouge him, hit him in the back of the head, knee him in the groin. And at that time, Tom Molyneux was a master at that. He knew how to get you in submission. He knew how to get you into an armbar. He knew how to get you into a full Nelson, but he didn't know how to box. So the arrogance of Tom Molyneux felt as though he can whip any man in the world. Someone walked up to him and told him, since you feel you're the toughest guy, why don't you go over and fight Tom Cribb? And immediately Tom Molyneux would take a glass of beer that he was drinking, slam it on the counter, and ask, where is Tom Cribb? They told him he's in England. And as he was staggering, he wanted to know where was England. So they gave him a map and directions and sent him on a boat over to England. And Tom Molyneux would wind up in a bar once again. And this time he would be asking, I came over here to see a man by the name of Tom Cribb. Who is he? And ironically, the man who he was talking to was Bill Richmond. Bill Richmond said, you want to fight Tom Cribb? He said, yes, I do. He said, well, I got to tell you something. I think you can beat him, but you can't fight him the way you're fighting. You have to be a stand-up fighter. He said, can you show me? He said, yes, I can. You see, Bill Richmond was more of a boxer, and Tom Molyneux was more of a slugger. So Bill Richmond would teach Tom Molyneux the tricks of the trade. And he would finally get an opportunity in 1810 to face Tom Cribb. December 18th of 1810. Unfortunately, Tom Molyneux would be defeated by Tom Cribb in 33 rounds at the Chapel Common. But it just wasn't a defeat. It was a very sad moment because they took advantage of Tom Molyneux. And Bill Richmond thought because of his name, he would have an opportunity for fair play. So they called Bill Richmond the Black Terror. But they didn't have a name for Tom Molyneux. And what happened with Tom Molyneux, he was accused of having iron pellets in his fist because he basically knocked out Tom Cribb. And all the cornermen had jumped into the ring. With all the chaos, Tom Molyneux was knocked down, and his foot was stepped on, and his hand had been broken. That's why he had a clenched fist in pain. So when they went to go see whether or not Tom Molyneux had a fistful of pellets, they didn't find any. And at that moment, Tom Molyneux was hit over the top of the head with an iron pipe. And this would allow Tom Cribb X amount of time to get himself together. And by that time, Tom Molyneux's fist was broken, he was exhausted, his ribs was in pain, and he couldn't continue. So the fight would go 33 rounds, and Tom Cribb would be victorious. It's one of the most saddest moments because Tom Molyneux had knocked out Tom Cribb. 1811, May 21st, he defeated Jim Rimmer in 21 rounds. Now you're looking at Tom Molyneux, very astute, well-dresser, no nonsense, didn't play with you. 1813, he defeated Jack Carter in 25 rounds. 1814, May 27th, he defeated Bill Fulmer on age foul in 2 rounds. It was an alleged foul that most spectators had acknowledged. Lasted 68 minutes in Parsley, Scotland. 1815, he would have 7 more fights. And at the age of 34, he would no longer fight again. And what's amazing about Bill Richmond, he continued fighting until 1815. On November 12, 1818, Bill Richmond had an impressive battle with Jack Carter, defeated him in a 3rd-round knockout. Richmond died December 29, 1829, at the age of 66. Now, this picture you're looking at is an insert of Boxomania. To your left, you have Tom Molyneux, and to your right, you have Tom Cribb. As you can see here, this is the second contest. They fought twice in a rematch. But about that time, Tom Molyneux, he was pretty much done. He had hundreds of fights in the streets, in the saloons, but it was always brawls. He wasn't a stand-up fighter, but he was a very good one with his hands. This is a chapter of Tom Cribb's story. Boxania. One of the dozen books that I have on bare knuckle fighting. Now, this is the famous silver cup that was presented to Tom Cribb. Now, this cup was rightfully owned and should have been presented to Tom Molyneux. And it's because of the foul play that happened in that fight with Tom Molyneux and Tom Cribb. It is why tragedies in boxing are in the history books. Because Tom Molyneux should have been awarded this cup. He was cheated. He was lied to. He was hit in the back of the head with a silver pipe. And they lied and said he had iron pellets in his fist. He did not. They jumped him because the only person that was in his corner was Bill Richmond. There were 12 other non-factors in Tom Cribb's corner. He took advantage of him. He was not from that country. He was born in America. And it's just unfortunate. This is one of the unjust circumstances that happened to the African-American fighter. Tom Molyneux, very powerful, built, very strong, a man with constitution. He was the first black fighter to fight a British champion. He was African American. His name was Tom Molyneux. Now, this is Tom Molyneux to your left and Bill Richmond to your right. Now, when Bill Richmond fought Tom Cribb wasn't champion at the time. When Tom Molyneux fought him, Tom Cribb was champion. Either way, these are two African-American fighters They were the first of the United States of America to fight from that country. Here's Tom Cribb of England. In the Deep South, backwoods, you had what was known as the Battle Royale. Now, most of these fights were fought blindfolded. Anywhere from 4 to 8 men, ranging from the age of 13 to the age of 27. And their job was to beat what was ever in front of them to submission and to be the last man standing. They were all African American boys and men combined. It was for the entertainment of the white establishment. Pennies would be thrown at them, and they would have to, with their gloves on, try to pick those pennies up. Also part of the entertainment of the white establishment. The men who participated in such events were men like Kid Norfolk, George Dixon, Jack Johnson, Professor A.C. Smith, all the way up to Bojack, Henry Armstrong, who was Medley Jackson, also participated in such events, and hundreds of more. Very unfortunate. It was a spectacle of an event, I should say. But this was how the African American fighters were looked at and treated. Charles A.C. Smith was known as the Black Thunderbolt. He was born May 3rd, 1860 to 1866. His birth varies. But he was from Macon, Georgia. He died October 1924, stood 5'11" to 6 feet, weighed 168 to 230 pounds. He was managed by Bill Muldoon. As a young boy, Smith moved north along with his mother. In 1865, at the age of 19, Smith began fighting. He had around 225 bouts. Charles A.C. Smith defeated great Hall of Famers such as Black Pearl, Harris Martin, Frank Craig, the Harlem Coffee Cooler, September 12, 1892. Bill Slavin and Ted Richcard, Black Diamond, Harry Woodson, Black Frank, Professor Charles Hadley, Steve Taylor, Thomas Soap Alpine, George Godfrey, just to name a few. Very good fighter was Charles A.C. Smith. He would wind up becoming a very good professional. He would develop a school for fighters. He was a professor, very intellectual in mathematics. Salute to Professor C.A.C. Smith. He was known as the Black and the Michigan Thunderbolt. Old Chocolate, George Godfrey, was born March 30th, 1853, Prince Edward Island. He died October 17th, 1901, Reverse, Massachusetts. He fought from 1879 to 1895. Stood 5 foot 10 and a half inches. He weighed 165 to 176 pounds. He was a light heavyweight and heavyweight. He became the colored heavyweight champion. Poor fighters such as C.A.C. Smith, McHenry Johnson, Denver Ed Smith, Charles Hadley. March 14th, 1888, Godfrey challenged Sullivan, John O'Sullivan, and he refused. January 25th, George Godfrey versus Johnson, faced in Bloomfield, Colorado. Became Johnson, was called Minneapolis Star. George Godfrey knocked down Jack Johnson 3 times. The referee first ruled Godfrey the loser by a loss of a foul in 4 rounds. The verdict? He later reversed it. The decision, and Godfrey got the winner, and they shared the purse. Harry Woodson was known as the Black Diamond. January 25th became the colored heavyweight champion of the world. Salute to George Godfrey. Old Chocolate. Now, old George Godfrey, Old Chocolate. I believe I mentioned he lost his title, the colored heavyweight championship belt, to Jack Johnson. I meant to say Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson was the Black Prince. And he was born July 3rd, 1861, St. Croix, Danish West Indies. He died July 3rd, 1901, Romania, Queensland, Australia. He stood 6 foot 1 and a half inches. He weighed 190 to 210 pounds. Fought from 1883 to 1899. 1956, he was entered into the Boxing Hall of Fame. 1990, International Boxing Hall of Fame. He aligned himself with John O'Sullivan in 1880. In 1890s, John O'Sullivan refused to fight the Black Prince, Peter Jackson. You see, the problem was, in 1892, Gentleman Jim Corbett had sparred with John O'Sullivan right before their fight in New Orleans. So Corbett had a chance to feel out John O'Sullivan. Knew what he had. So when they fight in New Orleans, Jim Corbett had knocked out John O'Sullivan in 21 rounds. But the Black Prince, Peter Jackson, had won 61 rounds with Jim Corbett. And Peter Jackson won the majority of the rounds. Now, you hear different stories from different sources. You're going to have various opinions on what they believe is facts. but the majority of the sources that I have state that Peter Jackson was basically ahead on points. And they kept going round after round to see if they can get Jim Corbett ahead on points. So they decided to make it a draw when Corbett couldn't catch up. Because they knew that Peter Jackson would never get a shot at John O'Sullivan anyway, because John O'Sullivan already stated he put a line on a color bar. He would not fight a black fighter. Wasn't going to happen. And that's how Gentleman Jim Corbett got that shot, because of the 61-round draw that he had with Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson was an Australian heavyweight champion and a colored heavyweight champion. He defeated the old chocolate, George Godfrey, to win that title. He arrived in Australia from the West Indies, fought bare knuckle from 1882. He challenged Jake Kilrain instead because he didn't get the fight with John O'Sullivan. And when Jake Kilrain had faced Jim Smith for the Police Gazette heavyweight championship belt in 1887, Peter Jackson had asked if he can have that fight with Jake Kilrain. Jake Kilrain refused to fight Peter Jackson. And he would give that opportunity to Jim Smith. And Jake Kilrain would win that belt and become the heavyweight champion of the United States. Paddy Ryan, John O'Sullivan would have a fight 1882. Once again, Peter Jackson